At 6:47 p.m., I texted Michael. Asterisk, dinner's almost ready. Can't wait to see you. Asterisk. At 7:12 p.m., I checked his location. We'd shared location settings for years, a safety measure that had somehow become a surveillance system I didn't know I was using until this exact moment. The little blue that was at the Carlisle, a hotel in Midtown. I stared at the screen for 30 seconds, maybe 40. The timer in the kitchen chimed, and I went to pull the short ribs from the oven. The meat was perfect, falling off the bone, glossy with reduced wine and stocked. I covered the dish with foil and sat down at the table. At 8:30 p.m., the food was cold enough that I finally put it in the refrigerator. I poured myself a glass of the Cabernet and sat in the dark, scrolling through Instagram without really seeing anything. At 9:47 p.m., I saw the post. Jessica Wilson had posted a photo 9 minutes earlier. 2 wine glasses on a white tablecloth, a hint of a man's cuff in the corner. The caption was a single heart emoji. I knew the cuff. I bought that shirt for Michael's birthday last year. Ralph Lauren, Black Label, $450. I zoomed in on the photo. The cufflink was the one I'd given him on our wedding day. Antique gold with tiny sapphires, a family heirloom from my grandmother. He'd promised to wear them on every anniversary. Happy anniversary, my love, I whispered to the empty room, and the words tasted like acid. The first time I noticed something wrong with Jessica Wilson was 3 months ago. She'd started at Carter Industries as a junior account manager, young, eager, with the same dark hair and green eyes that I'd spent my 20s perfecting with highlights and colored contacts. I noticed the resemblance at the company picnic, but I dismissed it as coincidence. People looked like other people all the time. I team at nothing. Except it didn't mean nothing. I started paying attention after the picnic. Jessica always seemed to be in Michael's orbit, bringing him coffee at exactly the right moment, laughing too loudly at his jokes, finding reasons to touch his arm during meetings. I told myself I was being the jealous wife, the paranoid partner, the woman who couldn't trust her husband despite 15 years of fidelity. Then came the first text. It was a Thursday night, 11 p.m. Michael was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen without thinking, and my stomach dropped. Jessica, asterisk, asterisk, I can't stop thinking about tonight. When can I see you again? Asterisk. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. My hands were shaking. I picked up his phone, entered his passcode, our anniversary still, and scrolled through the conversation. There wasn't one. The thread was empty. He deleted everything except that single message, probably sent in a moment of carelessness, the one piece of evidence he'd forgotten to erase. I put the phone down exactly where I'd found it. Michael came out of the shower, towel around his waist, water still dripping from his hair. He kissed my shoulder, told me he loved me, and fell asleep with his arm around me. I didn't sleep at all. For the next 2 weeks, I became an expert at deception. I smiled at Michael over breakfast. I told him about my day, my work, my nothing little problems at the gallery where I served as assistant director. I pretended not to notice when he came home late, when he started working weekends, when his phone buzzed at odd hours and he'd step into the other room to answer. I didn't confront him. Confrontation was what I'd been taught, my mother's voice in my head. Asterisk, always give him the benefit of the doubt. Men make mistakes. A good wife forgives. Asterisk. But I couldn't forgive something that hadn't been admitted. And I couldn't admit something I hadn't proven. So I started collecting evidence. I created a private folder on my laptop called Inventory and filled it with screenshots. Every Instagram post from Jessica, every tag location that overlapped with Michael's meetings, every ambiguous caption that made my chest tight with certainty. I took photos of his receipts. The 2 dinners at Le Bernardin, the hotel charges at the Carlisle, the flower delivery to an address I'd never seen before. I was becoming the detective in my own marriage, and the only person I was fooling was myself. Sarah, you look exhausted, my friend Valerie said when we met for brunch at Balthazar. Is everything okay at home? Everything's fine, I said automatically. Michael's just been working a lot. You know how it is. Valerie gave me a long look. She'd known me since college, had stood beside me at my wedding, had held my hand when I miscarried 2 years ago and Michael had been too busy with the IPO to come to the hospital. Sarah, she said, you're lying to me. I can always tell. I wanted to tell her everything that I wanted to break down in the middle of the restaurant, to let someone else carry the weight of what I discovered. But I couldn't. Because once I said it out loud, it became real. And if it was real, I would have to do something about it. So I laughed and changed the subject, and Valerie let me get away with it, because that's what real friends do. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd been feeling sick all week, nauseous, exhausted, with a low-grade fever that wouldn't break. I'd been to the doctor, who'd run tests and told me to rest. It's probably a virus, she said. Give it a few days. Michael left for work at 7 a.m. I was curled on the bathroom floor, the cold towel pressed against my cheek, trying not to throw up, and my phone buzzed on the counter. Jessica's Instagram, of course. I'd started checking it obsessively, a form of self-torture I couldn't seem to stop. The photo was from the Hamptons, a beach house, white sand, champagne in crystal flutes, Jessica's manicured fingers wrapped around a glass, the background showing a man's bare shoulder in the frame. The caption, best surprise getaway ever. He really knows how to treat a girl. I scrolled down. Comments from her friends, all glowing, all supportive. He's so romantic. You're so lucky. When's the wedding? I threw my phone across the bathroom. It hit the wall and shattered, pieces of glass scattering across the floor like little mirrors. He told me he had a board meeting, an emergency, couldn't get away. He'd flown her to the Hamptons for a romantic getaway while I was too sick to stand. I sat on the bathroom floor for an hour, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Then I got up, cleaned the glass, called a friend to bring me a new phone, and went back to work. Because that's what you do when you're a good wife. You forgive. You forget. You pretend. I was done pretending. The evidence I'd been collecting started to form a picture I couldn't unsee. The credit card bills showed hotel charges on weekends Michael claimed to be at the office. The phone records showed hours-long calls to Jessica's number at all hours. The emails I'd found on his laptop, he'd forgotten to log out, were worse than anything I'd imagined. My wife doesn't understand me. You're the only one who sees who I really am. I feel more alive with you than I ever have with her. Asterisk, she's just there, like a piece of furniture. I'm not even sure why I married her anymore. Asterisk. Each sentence was a knife in my chest. I thought our marriage was solid. I thought we were happy. I thought I was the love of his life, the woman he'd chosen, the partner who'd stood beside him through every challenge. I'd been wrong about everything. Michael came home that night, his usual charming smile fixed in place. He kissed my cheek, told me about his day, asked about mine. I made dinner and talked about my work and acted like I hadn't just seen the words, "I'm not sure why I married her" on a screen. "I love you, Sarah," he said as we were getting ready for bed. "You're the most important person in my life." "Good night, Michael," I said, and I let him kiss me because I wasn't ready to let go yet. I wasn't ready to admit that the marriage I'd built for 15 years had been hollow from the start. The night of our anniversary, I waited until 10 p.m. before I let myself accept the truth. Michael wasn't coming home. He wasn't going to show up with flowers and apologies and excuses about a late meeting. He was at the Carlisle with Jessica, sharing wine and romantic cufflinks, and everything I thought was mine. I opened my laptop and looked at the inventory folder. There were hundreds of files in there now, screenshots, photos, credit card statements, hotel receipts. I'd been building this for months, telling myself I was just being thorough, just making sure I had all the facts before I made any decisions. I knew the facts. I had the facts. The problem was what to do with them. I could confront him, demand explanations, force him to choose, make him admit what he'd been doing. That was the logical response. That was what the advice columns would say. But Michael wasn't going to admit anything. Michael was a man who'd spent 15 years building a persona, loyal husband, successful CEO, devoted partner. He'd rather die than let anyone see the cracks. And I'd spent 15 years helping him build it. I'd been the supportive wife, the hostess, the silent partner who made his success possible. I'd given up my own career ambitions because he needed me at home. I'd reshaped my life around his schedule, his needs, his version of what our marriage should look like. I'd done everything right. And he'd still cheated on me with a woman who looked like the younger, easier version of what I used to be. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. The rage I expected didn't come. Neither did the tears. I felt something else entirely, something I'd never experienced before. Relief. Because now I knew. I had the proof. The uncertainty was over. The gaslighting, the second-guessing, the endless cycle of maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm paranoid. All of it was finally done. I knew he was a liar. I knew my marriage was over. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was going to make him pay. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Elena was a shark, brilliant, ruthless, and terrifying in court. She'd handled my sister's divorce 3 years ago and had extracted every last penny the bastard had ever earned. I'd always admired her, but I'd never thought I'd need her services myself. "Sarah," she said, her voice sharp and professional on the phone, "I assume this isn't a social call." "I need a consultation," I said. "My husband is cheating on me, and I want to know my options." There was a pause. Then Elena's voice softened, just slightly. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. When did you find out?" "Last night, but I've had evidence for months." Months. I was gathering it. I wasn't ready to act until I knew for sure. Smart. I heard papers rustling in the background. "Can you come in today? 2 o'clock? And bring everything you have." "I'll be there." I ended the call and looked at my reflection in the window. I looked tired, older than my age, worn down by years of trying to be perfect. I looked like a woman who'd been erased. But the woman who looked back at me had a gleam in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A sharpness. A hardness. The woman in the window was done erasing herself. At Elena's office, I spread everything out on her conference table. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, phone records, screenshots of Instagram posts, copies of emails I'd photographed with my phone. It was a mountain of evidence, and every piece of it told the same story. Elena examined each document with the careful precision of a coroner conducting an autopsy. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just worked her way through the pile in absolute silence. When she was finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "Your husband," she said, "has been stupid." "Extremely," I agreed. "He used the same credit card for both of you. He put hotel charges on the company account. He took photos of himself that would make any forensic accountant weep with joy." She shook her head. "This is almost too easy. So, what are my options?" Elena opened a file on her desk. "You want to leave him? Or do you want to stay and negotiate?" "Leave him," I said without hesitation. "Completely. Permanently. I want out." "Good, because the evidence you have gives me enough leverage to make him bleed." She flipped through the documents again, making notes. "I see you've documented his use of marital funds. That's crucial. Don't need to calculate the exact amount, but he's spent hundreds of thousands on this affair, and I'd argue all of it belongs to you as well. Under New York law, he's already committed financial infidelity on top of the adultery. Adultery in New York isn't a crime anymore." "No, but it's still a factor in divorce proceedings. Your husband's conduct during the marriage matters. And this?" She gestured at the mountain of evidence. "This is the kind of conduct that makes judges very, very angry." I nodded, trying to absorb everything she was saying. I'd spent years ignoring my rights, accepting his version of our marriage, believing the lies because they were easier to swallow than the truth. "I want a fair settlement," I said. "I want the apartment, the investments, and I want him to suffer." Elena smiled. That I can arrange. For the next 6 weeks, I maintained the illusion of a happy marriage. Michael came and went as he pleased, and I smiled and waved and pretended not to notice when he smelled like someone else's perfume. I had dinner on the table at 7 p.m. every night, and I listened to his stories about his day, and I kissed him goodnight like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was no longer his wife. I was his adversary. And every night, he went to sleep believing he'd won. I was building the case that would destroy everything he'd built. Elena and I met twice a week. We went over the evidence, calculated the assets, prepared the petition for divorce. We were thorough and methodical, leaving nothing to chance. Michael, meanwhile, grew bolder. He'd started bringing Jessica to company functions. She's just a colleague. He'd say, nothing to worry about. She'd look at me with this sweet, pitying smile, like I was the interloper in my own marriage. Your wife is so understanding, Jessica said to Michael once, with me standing right there. I don't know how you found someone so patient. Sarah's remarkable, Michael said, patting my hand. She's the rock of this family. I smiled and said nothing. But inside, I was counting the days, calculating the exact moment when I dropped the bombshell. When they'd realize I wasn't the fool they took me for. The explosion came on a Thursday. I'd arranged to meet Michael at his office after work, supposedly to discuss some minor financial matter. He was surprised to see me. I rarely came to the office, but he seemed pleased, settling into his leather chair like the king of his domain. Everything okay, honey? He asked. I need to talk to you about something important. I closed the door behind me, catching a lock. It's about us. His expression shifted, alert, cautious. The sudden tension in his shoulders told me he knew something was wrong, but he didn't yet know how wrong. What's going on, Sarah? I pulled the file from my bag. The file with everything, all the evidence, all the receipts, all the screenshots that told the complete, devastating story of his infidelity. Michael, I said, my voice steady, I know about Jessica, and everything else. The hotels, the trips, the money you've been spending. It's all here. I slid the file across his desk. He opened it, and I watched his face drain of color as he flipped through the pages. Sarah, he said, his voice cracking, I can explain. Explain what, exactly? I asked. Explain why you told me you were at a board meeting when you were flying her to the Hamptons? Explain why you charged $50,000 at the Carlyle and told me it was a business dinner? Explain why you've been calling her every night while I was making dinner for you. I didn't mean. Didn't mean what? I leaned forward, suddenly furious. Didn't mean to cheat. Didn't mean to lie. Didn't mean to spend our life savings on your mistress while I was too sick to stand. He stood up, coming around the desk toward me. Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please just let me explain. Don't, I said, stepping back. Don't touch me. Don't say my name. I came here to tell you that I filed for divorce and that I intend to take everything you have. His face shifted from panic to anger in an instant. You can't do that. You can't. Watch me. I pulled the last document from my bag, the court filing stamped and registered. This is a summons. You have 30 days to respond. If you don't, I'll take it all anyway. Michael stared at the document like it was a bomb. Sarah, please. Think about what you're doing. I love you. I made mistakes, but I love you. You don't love me, I said flatly. You love what I represent. Stability. Loyalty. A woman who'd stand by you no matter what. You don't love the actual person, Michael. You never did. His face crumpled. It was almost sad, the way he collapsed back into his chair, staring at the papers in front of him with dawning horror. You can't, he repeated, but the words were empty now. He knew I could. He knew I'd already done it. Goodbye, Michael, I said. And I walked out of his office without looking back. Standing in the elevator, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. But underneath the fear, I felt something else. Something I hadn't expected. Exhilaration. For 15 years, I'd been married to a man who'd loved me as a concept, a role, an accessory to his success. For 15 years, I'd played the part of the perfect wife, believing that if I were good enough, helpful enough, supportive enough, it would all pay off. It hadn't paid off. It had imploded. But as I stepped out of the elevator and into the New York evening, I realized something that would change everything. I was free. I had no idea what was coming next. The divorce would be messy, the recriminations endless. I'd lose friends who'd take a side, family members who'd call me difficult for refusing to work it out. But none of that mattered, because for the first time in 15 years, I didn't have to be anyone's reflection. I could be my own woman, make my own choices, live my own life. And the most beautiful part was that he never saw it coming. He thought I was weak. He thought I was compliant. He thought I was stupid enough to believe his lies and naive enough to forgive them. He was wrong. And soon, the whole world would know just how wrong he'd been. The first week after I filed for divorce was the quietest week of my life. No flowers arrived, and frantic phone calls, and attempts at reconciliation. Michael had retreated into the kind of cold silence that I'd seen him use on business rivals, the silent treatment as a weapon designed to make the other person panic and come crawling back. I didn't crawl. Instead, I moved out of the penthouse and into a temporary rental in Chelsea. IT was smaller, simpler, with none of the marble and sub-zero appliances I'd grown accustomed to. But it was mine. Every corner of it was mine, and every night I fell asleep in a bed where no one had ever lied to me. Elena called me daily with updates. Michael had retained his own lawyer, a sharp operator named Jonathan Reed, who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and had a reputation for bearing opponents in paperwork. He's going to fight you, Elena said. Jonathan's already filed a motion to have the evidence suppressed. Claims you obtained it illegally. I got it from his laptop, the one we share. Doesn't matter, he'll argue you violated his privacy. We'll have to prove you had a reasonable expectation of access. But don't worry, I've got a forensic accountant working on the financials. The credit card statements alone will kill him. Y tú usted, Elena. She was the only person in my life who seemed to understand what I was going through, the only one who didn't tell me to try to work it out, or think about what you're throwing away. No one seemed to understand that I wasn't throwing anything away. I was removing something toxic from my life, and the only thing I'd lost was the illusion of a happy marriage. On the 10th day after filing, I got a call from an unknown number. Sarah Mitchell? The voice on the other end was female, young, with an edge of false brightness. It's Jessica. Jessica Wilson. I said nothing. My hand tightened on the phone, but I kept my voice steady. What do you want? I think we should talk. Woman to woman. I know things are difficult right now, but Michael and I... Michael, and you have nothing to do with me. I cut in. Whatever you think you're building with him, it's between the two of you. I'm out. But Sarah, I really think... Don't call me again. I ended the call and blocked the number. My hands were shaking. Not from anger. At least, not entirely. There was something else there. Something I hadn't expected to feel. Pity. Jessica Wilson had no idea what she was getting into. She thought she'd won. She thought she was getting a successful CEO who'd leave his wife for her, who'd buy her dinners and hotels and the kind of life she'd been chasing. She didn't know that Michael Carter was a man who'd lie to anyone about anything if it served his purpose. She didn't know that he'd do the same thing to her the moment she stopped being useful. She was young, she was naive, and she was about to learn a very painful lesson. But that wasn't my problem anymore. 2 days later, Michael showed up at my office. I was at work, trying to focus on a grant proposal, when I looked up and saw him standing in my doorway. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same suit he'd been wearing the last time I'd seen him. Sarah. His voice was hoarse. Please, I need to talk to you. I stood up, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I wasn't running anymore. You have no right to be here. I've told your lawyer to contact mine. I know. He stepped into the room, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. I need you to hear me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I looked at him. This man I'd spent 15 years with. The man I thought I'd grow old beside. He looked broken in a way I'd never seen before. Not the controlled, confident CEO. Just a man in the middle of a collapse. 5 minutes, I said, and I sat back down. He took the chair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Sarah, I know I hurt you, Dad. I know I did things that can't be undone. But I want you to understand, I never stopped loving you. Dad, I never wanted to leave you. IT was just... Just what? My voice was flat. Just a mistake? Just something that happened? Just a moment of weakness. Yes, he said, grasping at the words. All of it. I was weak. I was stupid. But I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you. I let out a laugh, bitter and sharp. You love me? You spent 3 years lying to me, cheating on me, spending our money on another woman, and you think that's love. I know it doesn't look like it, but it doesn't look like it because it isn't it. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. You didn't love me, Michael. You loved what I gave you, stability, loyalty. A wife who'd forgive you no matter what. But love, that's not love. His face crumpled. I expected tears, the performance of remorse. Instead, he just sat there, staring at his hands, looking like a man who'd finally realized the walls were closing in. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. Sarah, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I need you to know that I regret everything. Every choice I made. Every time I hurt you. I watched him, waiting for the anger to come. But it didn't. All I felt was exhaustion. Michael, I said, I don't hate you. I don't even really care what you do anymore. That's the worst part. You hurt me so much that I stopped caring. And once you stop caring, there's nothing left to save. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. There's nothing I can do? No, there isn't. He sat there for a long moment, silent. Then he stood up, walked to the door, and paused. Sarah, he said without turning around, I loved you. Maybe not the way you needed me to, but I did love you. And then he was gone. I sat in my office for a long time after that, staring at the empty doorway. The tears came eventually, slow, quiet tears that I didn't bother to wipe away. But underneath the grief, there was something else. Something I hadn't expected. Peace. I'd said everything I needed to say. I'd let go of the hope that he'd change. And in not letting go, I'd finally set myself free. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, mediation sessions, and endless negotiations. Michael's lawyer tried everything, delaying tactics, procedural objections, even a motion to have me evaluated by a psychologist. Elena fought every motion, countered every argument, and slowly, piece by piece, dismantled their case. By the time we reached the settlement conference, I was exhausted but resolute. I wanted 3 things: the West Village penthouse, the investment portfolio we built together, and a clean break. No ongoing financial ties, no alimony, no shared accounts. He's going to fight you on the penthouse, Elena warned me. It's his primary asset. He has 3 other properties, I said. He can afford to give me one. He'll argue it's a marital asset, and he has a right to it. And I'll argue that he cheated on me for 3 years with a woman whose entire lifestyle he funded from our joint accounts. I think that tips the balance, don't you? Elena smiled. I love it when you're ruthless. I wasn't ruthless. I was done. There's a difference. On the day of the settlement conference, I walked into the conference room and saw Michael already seated at the table. He was flanked by his lawyer and a second associate I didn't recognize. Across from him sat Elena, calm and composed, her briefcase open with neatly organized files. Sarah, Michael said, and his voice was tight. I'm glad you came. I don't have a choice. I sat down in the chair next to Elena. Let's get this over with. The mediator, a portly man with a soothing voice, began the process. He went through the asset list, the liabilities, the proposed division of property. Michael's lawyer made arguments, Elena countered, and I sat there watching it all unfold like it was happening to someone else. Then came the sticking point. The penthouse, Michael's lawyer said, was purchased before the marriage. Mr. Carter feels it's not appropriate to cede full ownership without some form of compensation. Elena's eyes narrowed. The penthouse was purchased 3 years before the marriage, but it was extensively renovated during the marriage, using joint funds. Under New York law, that constitutes a commingled asset. Furthermore, the appreciation in value, approximately $2 million, occurred entirely during the marriage, largely due to the market and Mrs. Mitchell's contributions to the household. That's not how we see it, the lawyer countered. Then let's talk about the Hamptons property, Elena said, pulling out a document. The property Mr. Carter claims as his sole asset, but which we can demonstrate was used for the majority of his affair with Jessica Wilson, and we have receipts for the maintenance, the renovations, the trips. All paid for from joint funds. Michael's face went pale. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something I couldn't hear. The mediator looked between both sides, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps we can reach a compromise, the mediator said. Michael's lawyer said, we're willing to offer the penthouse, provided Mrs. Mitchell pays a buyout of $300,000. I laughed. I couldn't help myself. $300,000? For a property worth over $5 million? That's insulting. It's a negotiation, Sarah, Elena said softly. Then I have a counter, I said, and I pulled out my own folder. I want the penthouse, full title, no buyout. In exchange, I'm willing to forego any claim to the Hamptons property and the vacation home in Aspen. That's a fair trade, and you know it. Michael's lawyer looked at his client, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Sarah, Michael said, that's fair, I finished. Take it or leave it. The mediator looked at both sides, then nodded slowly. I think that's a reasonable starting point. Michael's lawyer whispered to him again. Then Michael nodded, looking defeated. Fine, he said. Take it. We walked out of the conference room together, Michael and I, down the long corridor of the law firm. Sarah, he said, stopping me with a hand on my arm. How did you become this person? I don't recognize you. I turned to look at him. This man who'd loved me once, who'd promised me forever. This man who'd thrown all of it away for a cheap imitation. I became this person, I said, the moment I realized I was the only person who'd ever fight for me. You certainly weren't going to. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I hope you're happy with Jessica, I said. I hope she's everything you wanted. And I hope, when she disappoints you, you remember what you had with me, what you threw away. And then I walked away, leaving him standing there in the hallway, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. 2 months after the settlement, I closed on the penthouse. It was mine now, completely, legally, indisputably mine. I stood in the empty living room, looking out at the city I'd left and come back to, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not pride in my marriage or my role as a wife, or any of the things I'd thought defined me. Pride in myself, in my survival, in the woman I'd become when everything I'd believed in had crumbled. The first thing I did was strip the wallpaper. The floral pattern had been Michael's choice, his compromise between my preference for something minimalist and his mother's taste for gaudy Baroque. I'd hated it for years, but I'd never said anything. I ripped it down myself, piece by piece, the sharp tearing sound echoing through the empty rooms. It took me 3 days, and by the end, my hands were raw and my shoulders ached. But the walls were bare and clean and ready for something new. The second thing I did was call Valerie. Sarah. Her voice was full of relief. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. How are you? What happened? The divorce is final, I said, and I'm coming home. You mean the penthouse? You kept it. It's mine now, and I'm going to make it my own. I heard her laugh on the other end. That's my girl. Now tell me everything. And I mean everything. I told her, and for the first time in months, I didn't hold anything back. The transformation took 6 months. I remodeled the kitchen, pulling out Michael's imported tile and installing something clean and modern. I painted the walls in soft grays and blues, colors he'd always hated because they weren't bold enough. I replaced the heavy furniture with lighter pieces, Scandinavian designs that made the space feel open and alive. I didn't think about him. I forced myself not to. Every time a memory surfaced, every time I remembered a dinner, a fight, a moment of false happiness, I pushed it aside. That life was over. This one was just beginning. But the hardest part wasn't the remodeling. It was the silence. I'd spent 15 years having someone to talk to, someone to share my day with, someone to fight and make up with. And now I came home to an empty apartment and conversations with myself. The loneliness was physical, a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of work could fill. I started spending more time with Valerie, going out for drinks, joining her book club, meeting new people. But every time I came home, the silence would return, and I'd realize that no matter how many friends I had, I was still alone. That was the gift I gave myself in those long months after the divorce. I learned to be alone. I learned to sit with the silence. I learned that being single wasn't the same as being broken, that I could live a full, happy life without anyone else completing me. And when I finally stopped looking for someone to fill the void, I looked up and realized I'd already filled it myself. I started getting calls from Michael's friends that autumn. Sarah, he's a wreck, they'd say. He's drinking too much, showing up late to meetings. Jessica left him. Did you hear? I hadn't heard, but I wasn't surprised. They're saying he's been asking about you, asking if you're okay, if you're seeing anyone. I'd hang up and try to forget, but the calls kept coming, and each one was a reminder that I'd left behind a man who still couldn't let go. In November, I ran into him at a charity gala. He was standing by the bar, looking older than he should, wearing the same cufflinks I'd given him on our wedding day. He saw me across the room, and his face went through a complicated series of emotions: surprise, relief, then something that looked almost like grief. He started walking toward me. I saw him coming, and I froze for just a moment. Then I squared my shoulders, took a breath, and turned to face him. "Hello, Michael," I said. "You look well." "Sarah." His voice cracked on my name. "I didn't expect to see you here. How are you?" "I've seen it. I'm doing well." I paused, and then I added, "The penthouse looks beautiful. I've been meaning to tell you." He blinked. "You remodeled?" "I made it my own." I smiled, not cruelly, but with the simple truth of it. It doesn't look anything like it used to. He nodded slowly, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger. Regret, maybe. "I'm glad," he said. "I'm glad you're happy." "I am," I said. "I really am." There was a long pause. Then I said, "You know, Michael, I never thanked you." He looked startled. "For what?" "For leaving, for giving me a reason to leave you." I met his eyes, and I held his gaze. "I spent 15 years building my life around you, and I thought that was the only way to be happy. But when you broke everything, I had to rebuild, and in rebuilding, I found myself." He stared at me, his mouth open. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I said. "I'm saying it because I think you need to hear it. The woman you married, the woman you thought you'd always have, she's gone and I'm not her anymore. I'm someone better." And with that, I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard him call my name, but I didn't stop. I was done stopping. That night, I went home to my penthouse, walked into my freshly remodeled living room, and opened a bottle of champagne. I poured myself a glass and raised it to my reflection in the window, to the city lights, to everything I'd been through. "To the end," I said. And I smiled. Because it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 2 years after the divorce, I stopped thinking about Michael entirely. It happened gradually, like the fading of a scar. At first, I'd still flinch when I saw his favorite restaurant or passed by the hotel where he'd taken Jessica. But eventually, the memories lost their sharp edges. They became stories I'd once lived, not wounds I was still carrying. I'd rebuilt my life completely. MY Art Gallery had expanded to a second location in Soho. I bought a small house in the Hamptons, my own, not the one he'd shared with her. I traveled to places we'd never discussed visiting. Kyoto, Barcelona, the Amalfi Coast. I'd made new friends who only knew me as Sarah, not as Michael's wife. And I'd started dating again. Nothing serious. A few dinners, a few pleasant evenings that didn't lead anywhere. I'd learned to enjoy my own company too much to settle for less than I deserved. But I still hadn't expected the call I received on a rainy October afternoon. "Sarah, it's Victor Hayes." The voice on the phone belonged to Michael's former business partner, a sharp-eyed man who'd always treated me with distant courtesy. "I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I think you need to hear this." "What is it?" I asked, my guard immediately up. "It's Michael. He's in trouble. Serious trouble." I met Victor at a quiet cafe in Midtown. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with stress. He ordered a black coffee and didn't touch it, just stared at it while he talked. "The company's in trouble," he said. "Has been for the last year. Michael's been making bad decisions, taking risks that don't make sense. And there's been a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" Asked though I already had a sick feeling I knew. "Money's been disappearing. Large amounts. We thought it was accounting errors at first, but it's not." He met my eyes. "It's him, Sarah. He's been embezzling from the company." I sat back in my chair, stunned. Why would he do that? Debts, gambling, I think. Maybe other things. He's been living beyond his means for years, and he's been covering it up with company funds. Victor shook his head. "We're going to have to fire him. And I think there's a good chance he'll face criminal charges." I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, proof that Michael had always been the man I discovered him to be. But another part, the part that had once loved him, felt something closer to pity. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Victor leaned forward. "Because he's been asking about you, talking about you constantly. He thinks if he can get you back, everything will be okay." He paused. "And I think he's going to try something desperate. He's been making threats. Not violent threats, but he's not stable, Sarah, that I wanted you to know in case he comes to you." I thanked Victor and left the cafe in a daze. A week later, Michael showed up at my gallery. I was in the back office when I heard the commotion, a raised voice, my assistant saying something in a soothing tone. I walked out to find Michael standing in the middle of the exhibition space, looking like a man who'd lost everything. His suit was rumpled. His hair was unkempt. His eyes had a manic brightness that made my stomach tighten. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "I need to talk to you." "Michael." I kept my voice calm. "You can't be here. You need to leave." "I can't leave. I need you to listen to me." He stepped toward me, and my assistant moved to block him. "Please, just 1 minute. I promise I'll go after that." I hesitated. Then I nodded at my assistant. "It's okay. I'll handle this." She retreated to the front of the gallery, watching us warily. I led Michael into the back office and closed the door. "What is this about?" I asked. "Everything." He collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking. "Everything I've done. Every mistake I've made. I can't stop thinking about it. About you. About what I threw away." "Michael, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. "I know that, but I need you to know that I've changed. I'm getting help. I'm seeing a therapist. Are you still gambling? I asked quietly. His face went white. How did you? Victor called me. He told me about the company, about the money. I sat down across from him. Michael, you're in serious trouble. Not just with your career, with your life. His face crumpled. I know, and I can't stop it. I can't stop any of it. I'm spiraling, Sarah. I'm losing everything. For a long moment, I said nothing. I watched the man who destroyed our marriage, who'd lied and cheated and stolen, and I felt something that surprised me. Compassion. Not love. Not forgiveness. Just the recognition of a broken human being who'd made terrible choices and was now paying the price. I can't help you. I said, finally. You need professional help. Real help, not the kind I can give you. You won't even try? His voice was desperate. Sarah, I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm asking you. Michael. I cut him off gently. You were the love of my life once. I built my world around you, and when you broke it, I thought I would die. He flinched. But I didn't die, I rebuilt myself, I'm whole now, and if I let you back into my life, you break everything again. Not because you mean to, but because you're still the person who made those choices. Sarah. I'm not punishing you. I met his eyes. I'm just not going to sacrifice myself for you anymore. I did that for 15 years. It's over. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging like a puppet with its strings cut. I understand, he said. I just needed to try. I needed to know if there was anything left. There's not, I said softly, and you need to let go. He stood up, walked to the door, and paused. He didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said, for everything. And then he was gone. I sat in my office, staring at the closed door. I expected to feel sad or angry or something. But all I felt was peace. 6 months later, I heard what had happened to Michael. It came through Victor, who called me out of the blue. I thought you should know, he said. The board fired him. They've filed charges for embezzlement. He's going to trial. Will he go to prison? Probably. A few years, at least. Victor paused. I'm sorry, Sarah. I know this isn't easy to hear. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt acceptance. Michael had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. I'd made mine, and I was living with mine. They were very different lives. The trial was brief. Michael pleaded guilty to all charges, hoping for a lighter sentence. The judge gave him 3 years. His assets were seized, the penthouse, the investments, everything he hadn't already gambled away. I watched the news reports from my living room, feeling a strange detachment. The man on the screen, being led away in handcuffs, was a stranger to me now. The man I'd married, the man I'd loved, the man I'd mourned, he'd stopped existing long before the trial started. I thought about calling him, writing a letter, sending some sign that I was thinking of him. But what would I say? I'm sorry this happened to you. That felt like a lie. I hope you get the help you need. That felt like pity. I said nothing, and I let the silence be its own kind of goodbye. A year after Michael's sentencing, I met someone. His name was Oliver. He was a professor of art history at Columbia, intelligent and kind, with a quiet steadiness that I found deeply appealing. He had no interest in my money, no desire to mold me into something I wasn't. He just liked me. You're the most independent woman I've ever met, he told me one night, over a dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant. I find it terrifying and appealing in equal measure. Terrifying? I laughed. Terrifying because I know you don't need me. You could leave at any moment and you'd be fine. He smiled. I'm used to people needing me. It's a little disorienting. Would you rather I needed you? I asked. God, no. His eyes softened. I want you to want me. There's a difference. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. We dated for 2 years before I finally let myself think about marriage. The idea terrified me, not because I didn't love Oliver. I did, deeply, but because I'd given my heart to someone once before, and he'd shattered it. The thought of doing that again